Hi there, this is Rachel Stone introducing transformational leadership, all elements of leadership, but especially transformational leadership, which includes learning to be a coach while you're a leader. All coaches are leaders, but not all leaders are coaches, and my mission is to help solve that. I hope you enjoy. We're on habit number 9, which is choosing to be kind. And I'll just recap for those people who may not have been here at the beginning. We are looking at the work of Dr. John Blakey and the Trusted Executive. We are all team members here from the Associates of Coaching. I'll introduce all my guests. I have Ruchi Shah-Mehta. She's a co-chair of the Fellowship Board, along with Sharon Curry, who's also the same, but Sharon's also a managing partner. And we've got executive coach Wicker, who's also part of our team. In the model that Dr. John Blakey made, he worked out that there's a massive amount of academic research into trust throughout the world, and also he did intensive case study work with over 300 or 400 chief executive officers and business owners, and did a massive study for his PhD to work out the benefits of trust in leadership. And what does trust look like? What habits do you need to exhibit in order to build trust-based relationships? This is so important now as the kindness economy emerges. And so this habit number 9 is one of my favorites. I'm a big fan of the kindness economy, the B Corp movement, and moving away from the single bottom line to the triple bottom line. 3 pillars instead of 1. We have ability, we have integrity, and benevolence. And the choosing to be kind is the last habit under that pillar of benevolence. So I normally start with, what does kindness mean? So I'm going to invite Marie to start with. How does the habit of kindness manifest itself in the workplace if you're a leader?
It's an interesting one, the topic of kindness, Rachel, because I think everybody likes to think that they're kind. But in the context of being a kind leader, according to John's research, it is those little random acts of kindness. It's about consistency. It's the small things that are all about bringing happiness and joy to other people. We are servant to the people that we serve. And it can seem very simple, but I think it's easy in the world of leadership and business to be so focused on the delivery that we forget the difference that those random acts of kindness can have.
That's so good to bring that in, because in the book he talks about the TNTs, and TNT is associated with dynamite, and it's tiny noticeable things which can explode, but in a good way. A tiny little bit of something, taking the time to care, even just to say hello nicely. And for example, a little thing I remember when I worked at the college, when somebody in the staff cohort had passed an exam, in studying in their own time, the college manager at the time took time out to go down to the member of staff to congratulate her privately. The worst thing he could have done for her would have been to do that in the staff briefing. She would have been mortified with that. So he knew that about her. He was very kind. He didn't do what he wanted to do, make a big presentation. He did what she wanted to do. And with kindness, he went down to her own office and quietly, one-on-one, congratulated her. A tiny little thing, TNT, but it was always remembered the way that he made her feel in that one moment. So anything you'd like to add to that, Ruchi, as a chief executive coach? Have you examined any of these habits?
From my experience of working with CXOs and senior leaders and chief executives, one of the things that always comes up is this conscious choice that leaders can make. And when they make it, it's the purple dye effect. It's a little act, and it has a huge impact on people around them. And that sense of belonging, it impacts how people feel in an organization. So one of my clients was actually reflecting on something that happened just a few weeks ago. This is a CXO who was working with his team, preparing for a very big project. And he said the fact that we were working very late that evening, and the chief executive on her way out actually stopped by because she noticed there's a room full of people and lots of stuff going on, curiously just stopped by and said, "Oh, what's going on here?" He showed that curiosity and thanked everyone for staying up so late and doing what they were doing. That made a massive difference. And this person was reflecting on the lift of energy they felt and the work that carried on beyond that. So there is a huge link to how people feel when you see these little moments of kindness.
I really enjoy hearing about that, because it's so easy to forget that. And in the work, they talk about what's the opposite of kindness. And it's not cruelty, surprisingly. It's neglect. If you neglect to make a point of noticing these things, it comes over as unkind, when actually it's just careless. It's not that you care less, it's just careless to not make a point of doing the tiny things. And on that note, I'd like to mention that I found some synergy with other pieces of work that I've come across in the past, and they do say there's no such thing as new content, but actually I can see the dots joining up. And way back 7 years ago, I think it was, I saw a TEDx talk by Shah-Mehta and his piece of research that he did, The Happiness Advantage. It's a great little book in there, actually. It's a fantastic video to show teams how do you create happiness. And one of the things in his ingredients and in his recipes, I'll let you look that up and find it for yourself. The Happiness Advantage, Shah-Mehta. And he was saying one of the things that builds happiness is deliberately choosing to carry out random acts of kindness. And if you put that into the workspace, if it's one of those little habits that people, all points of the organisation do, you create that wonderful atmosphere, which builds that sense of belonging, like you've mentioned, Ruchi, but also it's something that everyone looks forward to, and it makes you feel good as well as the people receiving it. Deliberately working on being your best self every day by thinking, well, how can I be kind today? I always think of the phrase, what experience do you want other people to have of you? What experience have they had? Letting go of that self-mastery and having an outburst of emotion becomes neglect, which then can become unkindness. And the scars and the healing that you have to do after that is really hard work. So once you've got that more conscious level, like you mentioned, Ruchi, of becoming kind, you avoid a lot of mistakes. Anything in there, Sharon, that you'd like to add around your experience of this habit in your co-chair, for example, when you're leading a group?
Kindness is a way of being, and the more you practice, the more it becomes your authentic self. I mean, some people don't declare themselves to be particularly kind or thoughtful people, but the more you practice those tiny noticeable things or random acts of kindness, the more it becomes a way of being. And that way of being is around, are you inclusive? Do you respect others? Do you have empathy? Do you have genuine concern? Do you just ask how somebody is and then walk off before they've finished the answer? I've had that happen to me before, which was terribly unkind in a meeting room. So generous of spirit, giving of yourself, giving your time, willing to share your knowledge, not holding things to yourself, but giving resources without expecting anything in return.
And these habits do interlink so much, don't they? We've talked about how these habits do link together so much. And being humble and being honest, being open, coming to work with your whole self, all of those things blend between benevolence and integrity. One thing I do know is that if you are unkind, the damage that you do creates such amount of work to repair. So it's a great habit to get into. But where are the tensions then, perhaps, with other habits? If you're going around just being kind all day, what might be an outcome from that if you just focus entirely on this one?
Honesty, definitely a tension with kindness there, because it takes a lot of skill and it takes sensitivity to deliver honest feedback, especially when it's around performance in a constructive manner. But we know that it's a kindness because without delivering that feedback, you are disabling a person from actually reaching their potential. And having a feedback interview or review once a year or once every 6 months where somebody's just battered with all the things that they could be doing better is not a kindness. So there's a real tension between honest feedback and the skill it takes to be kind.
Generally speaking, people like to tell other people what they think they want to hear. And that's not an authentic way to lead. I always remember back in the day that series, Are You Being Served? And the old Mr. Grace used to come out of the lift and lift up his walking stick and go, "You're all doing very well." Or maybe he meant to be kind, but it wasn't very genuine because not everybody in that arena was doing well. And I know it's only a fictional character, but if you replicate that into business world, if you've constantly got a leader who comes in, "You're my stars, you're my super team, my fab team," giving everybody really great, encouraging empty, vacuous statements, but never giving attention to detail, really noticing great performance and taking the expertise to feedback around good performance as equally strongly as feeding back about less good performance. And I think in my experience, it's the single biggest headache that a lot of new leaders have, that responsibility to provide feedback and learning that one simple skill. And here I make a little plug for coaching because it's a great thing to discuss with your coach. So I put a sneaky plug in there. If you are struggling as a leader with feeling it's much easier to go and talk to 3 other people down the corridor about somebody's poor performance, but not to actually sit in front of somebody and explain how they could be doing better. That's something as immediately a piece of skill you can learn to do it well. when things have gone well and when things aren't going well. And wouldn't that be great? We could fix that one.
Brené Brown, I love her quote, it's kind to be clear. And I use a lot with my clients, within my family. Going back to Sharon's point, if you do it in the right way, it can be very kind, because you're helping that person increase their self-awareness of behaviour that isn't helping other people or helping them. And that's kind, isn't it?
Also, the Johari window, when people can't see their own blind spots. I remember when I was at the college, one of the things I always used to get the job of telling students about their personal hygiene. If we had somebody who, for example, might not be aware of the fact that their personal hygiene was affecting other students, I always got that job. I did learn some quite good skills from some other colleagues about how to deliver that kindly, because you don't want to smash somebody's self-worth by saying, God, you stink. But we did actually find a routine that worked, that was quite kind, and we helped them with their self-awareness. And we don't know what we don't know until someone helps us. And another way, whenever I deliver this training, I always say about my great auntie Vera, always giving me peach talcum powder for Christmas. And she didn't know I had 12 bottles because I never really liked it or used it. But I was very compromised about telling her, please don't give me any more peach talcum powder. But you can imagine that replicated throughout business, where people don't know how to provide that kind message about how somebody can improve. Again, kindness does cause tension with delivery, doesn't it?
Yeah, the two other habits that it is in tension with the most are delivery, as you've mentioned, and being brave. So delivery, I think that's the most obvious, because under time pressures, under results pressures, it's very easy to break trust by a harsh word or a pressure, or not having the empathy, actually doing all of the aspects opposite of what we said kindness was. So that comes into tension a lot, because, of course, a lot of businesses out there are under a lot of pressure to deliver. So how do you consciously bring kindness to the foreground and keep it kind? And that requires an openness and an honesty and a very safe environment that we talk about, in order to be able to say, wait a minute, we're crossing our values, we're crossing our boundaries here. We need to feed back in general that we're not being particularly kind. And the other habit is around being brave. There's a tension there, because for leaders, they have to be brave in decision making. That can require really tough choices, and those tough choices might not appear kind in the short term. And so for everybody, leaders have the difficult job, and they have to make those tough decisions. So they do have to deliver, and being brave brings tension, that kindness habit.
For any leader who thinks actually kindness is hard and it's a thing that you park at the distance because it comes at the detriment of productivity or results or anything else, I think there's something that we need to hold here around kindness with boundaries. That is what we're talking about. And actually, when you keep the honesty, when you keep the openness, when you keep even using that coaching approach, all of that within that sense of care and empathy, that kindness is palpable, and that kindness is authentic, and that kindness is in the best interest of all these human beings who are working with you and for you.
Absolutely. I bring to mind the word dignity. And when I was doing my management training at Safeways 30 years ago now, I remember we had some young children in the car park on their skateboards, and lots of customers were coming in to complain. And the store manager at the time, he said, I'm going to go down there and give them a piece of my mind. And the other assistant manager was a young chap, and he said, no, let me go. He said, they need to keep their dignity when we're talking to them. And I always remember that. People come to work and they really want to preserve their dignity. And being kind by talking to somebody in a manner which helps them to realise their own issue without clamping down, being in this closed manner of talking. And I always remember that. And I think that's such a good phrase. People come to work and they do want to maintain their dignity. And if you're being unkind to somebody, what you get back is more unkindness, and that's never going to repair or solve any problems. So it's a really difficult habit to keep. I keep seeing these sticks with all these habits on the top where everyone has to keep going between all of the habits and making sure that they're perhaps not dwelling on just being kind, but making sure they're delivering, remembering to be consistent. It is quite a lot. And I think exploring it in these ways, hopefully we've enabled people to see that there are lots of things to consider if you want to be in this kindness economy. Being a trusted executive, but trust is paramount now. As the technology increases, and we're finding it ever so much harder to discern what's true, what's fake, what can we rely on, Is something a threat? Is it something that we can take at face value? I'd really like to flag up the self-assessment tool, freely available on the website, www.trustedexecutive.com. It's a free tool there, and you can do a self-assessment around your own levels of all of these habits. I like the questions in here. Choosing to be kind, habit 9. I practice random acts of kindness in the workplace. Now, if you can always say, well, I always do that, or if you're somebody who's never done that, maybe that's something to think about. The next one is I show empathy and care when dealing with others at work. I think that's quite a challenge, like you've said, Sharon, with all those things around delivery. But where would you place yourself on that scale between never and always? And then I expect others to show care and kindness at work. And I think that links back to values in the workplace. And what we've said right throughout this whole series, clearly defined expectations. What are the values and what behaviours go alongside those values? Would you consider that to be a kind behaviour or an unkind behaviour? Does it sit in line with our values? And if you haven't got values set out clearly for people to see and refer to, it makes it much harder for people.
A brilliant example of a leader who demonstrates all of the habits, I would say, is Gary Grant, the founder and the chairman of The Entertainer, a huge toy store. You talk about kindness, encouraging others to be kind as well. He approaches it from a staff perspective, from a customer perspective, but also that encouraging others to be kind. So he gives all his staff Sundays off as a gesture of kindness, because he doesn't believe that staff should work on Sundays. They should have a day with their family, a day of rest. He provides steps for kids to approach the counters in the store so the children can go in and actually pay and ask questions, which is brilliant. But also, not only as a charity do they generously give millions of pounds to charities, but also he encourages giving by his staff through payroll giving as well. I recently heard a talk from him and it was really, really inspiring. A very successful multi-million-pound business.
We can't ignore the fact all organisations are open to scrutiny, and the way you conduct yourself for your stakeholders, which is now so apparent, whether you're just providing lip service and you've got great marketing, or you are truly doing the things that you say you do. If you've got something where they say one thing and they do exactly what they say they do, that's going to give them more trust, which is going to create better results. And that's really what this whole series is about, building trust, which gives you so many benefits. I would like to just bring in here the piece of work that made me really think about this when I was preparing for this session, which was Can't Ignore This Book.
The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
It's another really good book. I've noticed in there that there's an overlap between all of these things as they come together. The emotional bank account, you put deposits in like you would in a normal bank account, and an act of unkindness would take some deposits out. And there's only so many things that you can do that would make it go overdrawn. And I think it's really a great way to think about it. Tiny little noticeable things that you regularly do that are consistent pieces of kind behaviour. Keep regularly putting emotional deposits in people's bank accounts. That means if they say, for example, could you stay late? Of course you can, because people work for people because they believe in what they stand for. And if they haven't been kind, they won't feel so trusting to give of themselves. I choose to give my trust to somebody else's trustworthiness.
Just as you're sharing that, it has such a big connection with that sense of belonging. And I'm just going to go back to the famous Maya Angelou quote, people will forget what you say, people will forget what you did, people will never forget how you make them feel. Kindness being modeled at the top has a huge impact on how you make people, and a huge impact on the health of the organization, well-being of individuals. So it's lovely how we've talked around the habits and we come back to what I sometimes feel is at the heart of all the habits, holding that kindness. You can train people on empathy and lots of other things, but actually if they don't experience that kindness from the top, that culture is never going to shift.
And there's lots of examples. You possibly can relate to this. A great book, Turn That Ship Around, where the officers were eating separately and there was all this categorisation of you're entitled to park in that car park in some organisations, but you can't park there. All of those little things that make it feel like there's a them and us and those people are unkind because they've got this different status. It makes people feel less. But somebody's got that structure, but they come in and they're kind anyway. You can forgive them for the fact that they've got these other things that you're not entitled to. They can come in and
and say, oh, no, it's okay, you can go in front of me, or those tiny little things. The courtesy to greet effectively can go a long way. Very busy executives with so much pressure and the worries of the world on their shoulders, walking into a room, I always say, what do you fill a room with? And if they can just come in and give a kind greeting to somebody, it just goes a long way, doesn't it? It can cost you a tiny amount of time, but can build such a big effect that goes on lasting, the gift that keeps on giving in a way. It's like all of these things, they're so easy to undo, and it's just a habit to do that you could build consistently. Well, we've come to the end of our long series then. We've promised to deliver 9 days of learning about the trusted executive. We hope that we've spiked an interest with people and that they want to find out more. They want to find out more about the Fellowship Board. We've got an event coming up on the 12th of March. Sharon here is a person to reach out to. That's Sharon Curry. We might have a bit of a waiting list for that event now, but we run them regularly. Like to flag up the free assessment tool. We like to offer our support to leadership teams out there who want to build the correct culture to move forward and to lift their whole organisation up through a culture of kindness, but also through building trust-based relationships, enhancing reputations and delivering results. And trust is such a key part of that. And we hope we've unpacked that for you, that you're clearer and that you feel confident to reach out to us.